The people worth loving are usually the ones who are kind when they think nobody important is watching. A light spring rain had just begun falling over Cedar Grove, a quiet town outside Seattle, when Claire Bennett stepped out of Harper's Market carrying a paper bag filled with fresh flowers for her shop. The sidewalks glistened beneath gray skies. Cars rolled slowly through the parking lot. Most people hurried toward their vehicles, eager to escape the drizzle before it turned into something heavier. Claire adjusted her coat and started toward the street when a sudden crash of rolling oranges and grocery boxes caught her attention. About 30 feet away, a man stood beside an overloaded shopping cart. One torn grocery bag had completely split open. Apples rolled across the wet pavement. Cans scattered in every direction. A carton of eggs rested dangerously close to a puddle. Several people looked over. Nobody stopped. Some walked around the mess. Others pretended not to notice. The man crouched quickly, attempting to gather everything before traffic reached his section of the lot. Claire sighed softly. Without thinking twice, she hurried over. "Hold on," she called. "I have got the oranges." The stranger looked up, surprised. He appeared to be in his late 30s. Tall, well-built, simple jeans, dark jacket. Nothing about him stood out except his eyes. They seemed unusually observant, almost as though he noticed everything around him. "You do not have to help," he said. Claire was already collecting fruit from the pavement. That is a dangerous sentence to say to someone who owns a flower shop. The man blinked. "Why?" "Because we spend our entire lives fixing things that fall apart." For a second he stared at her. Then he laughed. A real laugh. Not loud. Just genuine. Claire handed him 3 oranges. "See? You are already feeling better." "Apparently I am." Together they gathered the groceries. Within minutes the parking lot looked normal again. Claire stood and brushed rainwater from her sleeves. "There. Crisis solved." The stranger glanced at the overloaded cart. "Actually, I still have to get all of this home." Claire looked toward the bags. There were far more groceries than one person should reasonably attempt to carry. "Do you live nearby?" "About 6 blocks." Claire laughed. "You bought enough food for a family of 10. I was not paying attention." Clearly, the man looked slightly embarrassed. Something about that expression felt oddly endearing. Claire checked the time. The flower shop would not open for another 30 minutes. "Well," she said, grabbing 2 bags from the cart. "Good thing I have strong arms." The stranger looked genuinely surprised. "You are helping me carry them? You have enough groceries to open your own supermarket." "Still," Claire shrugged. "My mother taught me that if you can help someone, you help them." For several seconds the man said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Thank you." Together they began walking through the quiet streets of Cedar Grove. Rain tapped softly against umbrellas and rooftops. The neighborhood felt peaceful despite the weather. Claire balanced several bags while the stranger pushed the cart beside her. "I am Claire, by the way." "Ethan." "Nice to meet you, Ethan." "Likewise." The conversation started naturally after that. Claire learned he had recently moved into town. Ethan learned she owned Bennett Bloom's, a flower shop her family had operated for nearly 20 years. They discussed weather, local restaurants, and the surprising difficulty of keeping houseplants alive. Ethan found himself smiling more than he expected. Claire had an easy way of talking to people. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt rehearsed. She spoke exactly the way she seemed to live, openly and honestly. After several blocks, they reached a modest apartment building. Ethan stopped near the entrance. Claire looked around. "This is home. For now." She nodded. The building was ordinary, comfortable, but far from luxurious. "Well, your groceries survived the journey. Thanks entirely to you." Together they carried the final bags upstairs. Once everything was safely inside, Ethan looked toward Claire. "I appreciate this more than you know." Claire smiled. "You would have done the same thing." Ethan almost answered immediately. Then he stopped himself. The truth was that a year ago, he probably would not have. A year ago, his life had been too busy, too focused on schedules, meetings, investments, and deadlines. But standing there now, watching Claire prepare to leave, he realized something. She had helped a complete stranger without asking a single question about what he did, what he owned, or whether helping him offered any benefit to her. That kind of kindness had become rare in his world. "Can I repay you somehow?" Ethan asked. Claire immediately shook her head. "Nope. At least let me buy you coffee." She laughed. "You really do not like owing people favors, do you?" Ethan smiled. "Not particularly." Claire headed toward the hallway. "Then consider us even." You gave me a good story for the flower shop. A story? Absolutely. Tomorrow I get to tell everyone about the man who almost lost a month's worth of groceries in one parking lot. Ethan laughed again. Claire waved and disappeared down the stairs. Several moments passed before Ethan moved. He walked to the apartment window overlooking the street below. Through the rain-speckled glass, he watched Claire continue down the sidewalk toward her flower shop. A small smile remained on her face. She never looked back. She never expected anything in return. Ethan stood there quietly long after she disappeared around the corner. Then he glanced toward one of the paper grocery bags sitting on the counter. Printed on the side was the logo of Bennett Blooms. For reasons he could not fully explain, he folded the bag carefully and placed it aside instead of throwing it away. Because for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Walker had found someone worth paying attention to. The next morning, Claire arrived at Bennett Blooms before sunrise. The flower shop sat on the corner of Maple Street, its front windows filled with colorful arrangements that brightened even the cloudiest days. She unlocked the door, switched on the lights, and immediately began preparing orders scheduled for delivery. Fresh roses waited in buckets near the back room. Tulips lined the counters. Lavender filled the air with a soft fragrance that made the entire shop feel welcoming. For Claire, mornings like this felt peaceful. Flowers were simple, honest. They did not pretend to be anything they were not. She preferred that. By 10 o'clock, customers had already begun arriving. An elderly woman stopped in for daisies. A young man purchased a bouquet for his anniversary. A teacher ordered centerpieces for a school fundraiser. The morning passed quickly. Then the bell above the front door chimed again. Claire glanced up and immediately recognized the customer. Ethan Walker stood near the entrance holding an awkward expression that made her smile before he even spoke. "Please tell me you did not lose more groceries," she said. Ethan laughed. "Not today." "Good. I was worried this would become a weekly tradition." He stepped farther into the shop, looking around carefully. "This place is beautiful." Claire glanced around. "You are the first person this week who has not immediately asked for a discount. I am aiming to make a good impression." "That sounds suspicious." Ethan smiled. "Maybe it is." Claire noticed several customers watching their exchange with interest. Apparently, they found Ethan amusing too. He walked slowly through the shop, studying the arrangements displayed throughout the room. Everything about his behavior seemed genuine. Yet there was something unusual about him. Most people entering a flower shop either knew exactly what they wanted or looked completely lost. Ethan appeared interested in everything. He asked questions about flower care, seasonal arrangements, delivery schedules. It was almost as if he simply wanted reasons to continue the conversation. "So," Claire finally said, "what brings you here?" Ethan looked at a display of white lilies before answering. "I wanted to thank you properly." Claire crossed her arms. "By interrogating me about flowers? I am gathering important information." "For what?" Ethan pointed toward a small arrangement sitting near the register. "That one." Claire glanced at it. "The tulips." "Yes. You came all the way here to buy tulips?" "Apparently." Claire laughed. "You are a very strange customer. I have heard that before." After paying, Ethan accepted the arrangement and prepared to leave. Then he paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends. Do you always help strangers?" Claire thought about it for a moment. "Not always." Ethan seemed surprised. "Really? Sometimes they are clearly trying to sell me something." He laughed. "Fair point." Claire leaned against the counter. "But if someone genuinely needs help, yes. Usually." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because life is hard enough already." The answer sounded so simple. Yet Ethan found himself thinking about it long after leaving the shop. Most people he knew approached every interaction as a transaction. Every favor carried conditions. Every relationship involved expectations. Claire seemed different. She helped because helping felt natural to her. Nothing more. Nothing less. Later that afternoon, Ethan placed the tulips on the kitchen table inside his apartment. The flowers immediately transformed the room. Bright color replaced empty space. Warmth replaced sterility. He stared at them for several moments before his phone suddenly rang. The screen displayed a familiar name. Richard Collins. Ethan sighed before answering. "Hello. You disappeared again." Ethan walked toward the window. "I have been busy." "Busy buying groceries?" Richard asked dryly. Ethan smiled despite himself. "Something like that." Richard's voice became more serious. "The board meeting is next week. They expect you there." Ethan remained silent. You cannot hide forever. I am not hiding. Then what are you doing? Ethan looked toward the tulips resting on the table. For a moment, he struggled to explain it, trying to remember what normal people care about. Silence followed. Then Richard laughed softly. That sounds suspiciously philosophical. Maybe. Does this have anything to do with the flower shop owner? Ethan glanced toward the flowers again. Maybe. Richard immediately understood more than Ethan intended. Interesting. Do not start. I am not starting anything. The amusement in his voice suggested otherwise. After ending the call, Ethan stood quietly inside the apartment. Outside, rain continued falling over Cedar Grove. Inside, the tulips brought unexpected brightness to the room. He found himself thinking about Claire again. About her kindness, her humor, the way she treated everyone exactly the same regardless of who they were. She still had no idea who he really was. She believed he was simply another resident of town living in a modest apartment. The truth was far more complicated. Yet for now, Ethan preferred it that way. Because every conversation with Claire felt real, unfiltered, honest. And for a man whose entire life had been shaped by wealth and status, that honesty had become something rare, something valuable, something worth protecting. As evening settled over the town, Ethan picked up one of the tulips and smiled. Then he found himself wondering what excuse he could invent to visit the flower shop again tomorrow. Over the next several weeks, Ethan developed a habit he would never have admitted to anyone. Nearly every day, he found a reason to visit Bennett Bloom's. Sometimes the excuse involved flowers. Sometimes it involved coffee from the bakery next door. Occasionally, it involved absolutely nothing at all. Claire noticed the pattern long before he realized how obvious it had become. One Tuesday morning, she looked up from trimming roses and found him standing near the entrance. "Let me guess," she said. "Emergency flower situation." Ethan nodded seriously. "Extremely urgent." "How urgent?" "Life-changing." Claire laughed. "That sounds expensive." "It probably is." By now, conversations between them felt effortless. They no longer searched for topics. The silence itself had become comfortable. Ethan learned that Claire loved old movies, disliked alarm clocks, and had an unfortunate habit of adopting every struggling plant she encountered. Claire learned that Ethan enjoyed long walks, drank too much coffee, and possessed a surprisingly dry sense of humor. Yet despite all the things they discussed, Ethan remained careful about certain details. Whenever conversations approached his previous career, he gently redirected them elsewhere. Claire noticed, but chose not to push. Everyone carried private chapters. She respected that. One afternoon, Ethan entered the flower shop carrying a small notebook. Claire immediately pointed at it. "What is that?" Ethan looked down. "A notebook." Suspicious answer. "Would you prefer a more dramatic one?" "Absolutely." Ethan considered the question. "Fine. It contains highly classified information." Claire smiled. "Now I am interested." Ethan opened the notebook and revealed several pages filled with handwritten notes. "You are looking at a list of every flower you have recommended during the past month." Claire stared at him. "You kept notes?" "I was studying." "Studying what?" Ethan closed the notebook. "The difference between tulips and lilies." Claire laughed so hard she nearly dropped a bouquet. "Most people use the internet. I prefer expert instruction." The truth was simpler. Ethan enjoyed listening to her talk about something she loved. Whenever Claire discussed flowers, her entire expression changed. Passion replaced routine. Enthusiasm replaced exhaustion. He found himself looking forward to those moments more than he should. Later that week, Ethan witnessed something that stayed with him long after leaving the shop. An elderly customer entered carrying a worn wallet and a worried expression. After several minutes of conversation, Claire quietly assembled a beautiful arrangement and handed it to her. The woman attempted to pay. Claire gently refused. "Consider it a gift," she said. "But I cannot accept that." "You absolutely can." "Claire, no arguments." The woman eventually left with tears in her eyes and flowers in her arms. Ethan watched the entire interaction from across the room. Once the door closed, he approached the counter. "You do that often?" Claire shrugged. "Do what?" "Give away inventory." "She lost her husband last month." Ethan remained silent. Claire continued arranging stems. "Sometimes people need kindness more than they need a receipt." The answer struck him harder than she realized. Throughout his career, every decision had been measured through numbers. Profit, growth, performance, return on investment. Claire seemed to measure success differently. She measured it through people, through moments, through the impact one small act could have on someone's day. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his apartment thinking about the flower shop. More specifically, he thought about Claire. He remembered the grocery store parking lot, the walk home, the countless conversations since then. He realized something uncomfortable. What began as curiosity had become something else entirely. He looked forward to seeing her. He noticed when she seemed tired. He remembered details from conversations weeks earlier. The realization should have concerned him. Instead, it made him smile. The following Saturday brought sunshine for the first time in days. Cedar Grove hosted a small community market downtown. Vendors lined the sidewalks. Musicians performed near the square. Families wandered between booths enjoying the pleasant weather. Claire operated a flower stand near the center of the event. Around noon, she spotted Ethan approaching through the crowd. "Let me guess," she called. "Another emergency." Ethan smiled. "I ran out of reasons." Claire laughed. "At least you are honest." For the next hour, he remained beside the stand helping customers carry purchases and answering questions he was completely unqualified to answer. Somehow people found him charming anyway. Several times Claire caught herself watching him when he was not paying attention. He treated everyone with the same patience and respect. Children, elderly customers, strangers. There was a quiet kindness beneath his reserved personality that continued to surprise her. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the town square, Ethan helped carry a final arrangement to a customer's car. When he returned, Claire handed him a small potted sunflower. "What is this?" he asked. "A reward." "For what?" Claire smiled warmly. "For being surprisingly useful." Ethan looked at the sunflower and laughed. Neither of them realized it yet, but somewhere between grocery bags, flower deliveries, and countless ordinary conversations, a friendship had quietly begun transforming into something far more important. By early summer, Ethan no longer needed excuses to visit Bennett Bloom's. Everyone in town had already accepted his presence as part of the shop. Customers greeted him by name. Delivery drivers assumed he worked there. One local resident even asked him where to find a particular flower arrangement. Ethan had accidentally become part of Claire's daily world, and neither of them seemed eager to change that. On a warm Friday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the front windows while Claire prepared orders for a wedding scheduled the next morning. The shop was unusually busy. Bouquets covered nearly every available surface. Buckets of fresh flowers filled the back room. Ethan arrived carrying 2 iced coffees and immediately stopped when he saw the organized chaos surrounding him. "Should I be concerned?" he asked. Claire looked up from a mountain of roses. "Only if you dislike hard work." Ethan handed her one of the drinks. "That sounds like a yes." Claire smiled. "Congratulations. You are volunteering." Within minutes, Ethan found himself helping assemble centerpieces. His results were questionable. Several arrangements leaned noticeably to one side. One bouquet somehow looked larger on the left than the right. Claire examined his work and tried unsuccessfully not to laugh. "What?" Ethan asked. "Nothing. That is not true." Claire pointed at a centerpiece. "I think that arrangement is slowly attempting to escape." Ethan looked offended. "Art is subjective, not when gravity gets involved." Their laughter filled the shop. For Ethan, moments like these had become priceless. They were ordinary, simple, completely disconnected from the world he normally occupied. And that was exactly why he valued them. Later that afternoon, an elderly man entered carrying a faded photograph. Claire immediately recognized him. "Mr. Patterson." The older gentleman smiled warmly. "Hello, Claire." Ethan stepped aside while they spoke. Mr. Patterson explained that his wife had loved a specific type of flower before she passed away several years earlier. Her birthday was approaching, and he wanted an arrangement to place beside her memorial bench in the town park. Claire listened carefully. Then she studied the photograph for several moments. "I remember these." The older man's eyes brightened. "You do?" "My grandmother grew them." Without hesitation, Claire disappeared into the back room and returned carrying several stems. She spent the next 15 minutes creating a beautiful arrangement while Mr. Patterson watched quietly. When she finished, the flowers looked almost identical to those in the old photograph. The elderly man's eyes filled with emotion. "She would have loved these." Claire smiled gently. "Then that is all that matters." Mr. Patterson reached for his wallet. Claire stopped him immediately. "No charge." "Claire, please. You already do too much." Claire shook her head. Not today. After the man left, Ethan remained silent for several moments. Finally, he asked, "How often do you do things like that?" Claire looked genuinely confused. Like what? Spend your own money helping people. She shrugged. Probably more often than my accountant would recommend. Ethan laughed softly. Then he became serious. Most business owners would not do that. Claire placed several flowers into a vase. Maybe. You work hard for this shop. I do. Then why give things away? Claire thought for a moment before answering. Because someday I will be old too. Ethan listened carefully. And I hope somebody remembers that people matter more than money. The answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended. That evening, after the shop closed, Ethan found himself walking through town alone. Cedar Grove glowed beneath the golden colors of sunset. Families filled outdoor restaurants. Children rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. The pace felt slower here than anywhere else he had ever lived. More importantly, it felt real. His phone suddenly vibrated. A message from Richard appeared. Board approval received. Expansion project ready to proceed. Call me. Ethan stared at the screen. Months earlier, the message would have excited him. He would have immediately started planning strategy sessions and investor meetings. Tonight, he simply slipped the phone back into his pocket. Instead, his thoughts returned to Claire and the flower shop, to Mr. Patterson and the memorial arrangement, to the countless examples of kindness he had witnessed since arriving in town. For years, Ethan had believed success came from building bigger companies. Now he was beginning to wonder if success looked more like the small flower shop on Maple Street. The next morning brought another surprise. Ethan arrived at Bennett Bloom's to find Claire loading flowers into her delivery van. "What happened?" he asked. Claire pointed toward the passenger seat. "You are coming with me." Ethan blinked. "I am. You owe me for those crooked centerpieces." "That seems unfair." Claire smiled. "Life is unfair." 20 minutes later, they were driving through town delivering arrangements. As sunlight poured through the windshield, Ethan found himself watching Claire laugh at something on the radio. In that moment, he realized something important. He was no longer visiting the flower shop because he was curious about her kindness. He was visiting because being near her had quietly become his favorite part of every day. By midsummer, Bennett Bloom's had become busier than Claire could remember. Wedding season filled the calendar. Community events generated constant orders. The small flower shop that had survived through determination and long hours was finally experiencing the kind of growth Claire had dreamed about for years. Yet success brought challenges of its own. One afternoon, Claire sat behind the counter reviewing invoices with a slight crease in her forehead. Ethan noticed immediately. He had become surprisingly good at reading her expressions. "That face means something is wrong," he said. Claire looked up. "I have many faces." "True. But that one specifically means you are worried." Claire sighed and closed the folder. "Nothing serious." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That answer usually means the opposite." Claire smiled despite herself. "The refrigeration unit in the storage room is getting old." "How old?" "Old enough that it makes noises like it is negotiating with the afterlife." Ethan laughed. "That sounds expensive." "It is." She shrugged casually, but Ethan could tell the situation bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Fresh flowers depended on proper storage. Replacing the unit would cost thousands of dollars. Money that a small independent business never enjoyed spending. "You will figure it out," Ethan said. Claire nodded. "I always do." That evening, Ethan sat alone in his apartment thinking about the conversation. On the surface, the problem was small. For someone with his resources, replacing the equipment would be effortless. Yet he knew Claire well enough to understand she would never accept financial help from him, especially if she believed he was simply another resident trying to get by. More importantly, he respected her independence. She took pride in building her business honestly. The next morning, Ethan made several phone calls. None of them involved his name. By the end of the day, a local business development foundation had unexpectedly announced a grant program supporting small businesses in Cedar Grove. Several companies received assistance. Bennett Bloom's happened to be one of them. 3 days later, Claire stared at the official letter in complete disbelief. "This cannot be real," she said. Her assistant, Megan, nearly jumped with excitement. "It is real." Claire reread the letter again. The grant would cover most of the refrigeration replacement cost. "We never even applied." Megan pointed toward the paperwork. "Apparently, they selected businesses based on community impact." Claire sat down slowly. Community impact? You literally give flowers away to half the town. Claire laughed. Not half. A very generous third. The following week, technicians installed a brand new refrigeration system. The flower shop immediately benefited. Flowers lasted longer. Inventory losses decreased. Stress disappeared. Claire felt grateful, though slightly puzzled by the timing. Meanwhile, Ethan remained completely silent. Watching her happiness provided enough satisfaction on its own. A few days later, another moment reinforced why he admired her so much. A severe summer storm passed through the region overnight, damaging several community gardens around town. Many residents arrived the next morning disappointed by what they found. Claire spent the entire day organizing volunteers, donating replacement plants, and helping restore public flower beds. Nobody paid her. Nobody asked her to do it. She simply believed it was the right thing to do. Ethan joined the effort without hesitation. Throughout the afternoon, he watched Claire move from person to person, offering encouragement and assistance. Children smiled when she handed them seedlings. Elderly residents thanked her for preserving gardens they had spent years maintaining. Everywhere she went, people responded with genuine affection. Later, while loading empty trays into a truck, Ethan found himself standing beside Mayor Reynolds. The older man nodded toward Claire. Good woman. Ethan smiled. She is. This town would look very different without her. Ethan already knew that. What surprised him was how many other people knew it too. Claire had spent years quietly improving lives without seeking recognition. She never advertised her generosity, never expected rewards, never treated kindness like a transaction. She simply gave because she cared. That evening, after the volunteer work ended, Claire and Ethan sat on a bench overlooking the town square. The sunset painted the sky with shades of orange and gold. People drifted through the streets, enjoying the cooler temperatures that followed the storm. Today turned out better than expected, Claire said. Ethan nodded. You made sure of that. Claire laughed softly. A lot of people helped. You started it. She looked away, slightly uncomfortable with praise. Ethan noticed. You never take credit for anything. Because most things are not done alone. Ethan studied her profile against the fading sunlight. You know, that is probably why people trust you. Claire glanced toward him. Trust me, you never seem interested in what you can get from people. The statement lingered between them. Claire smiled gently. Maybe that is because life works better when you focus on what you can give. Ethan looked toward the town square. The words struck him deeply. For years, he had lived in a world where everyone wanted something. Access, influence, opportunity, money. Claire remained the rare exception. She cared about people before outcomes, about relationships before advantages. And every day, Ethan found himself falling a little more under the influence of that simple truth. What he did not realize was that his carefully hidden world was slowly moving closer. Because while Claire remained unaware of who he truly was, the people searching for Ethan Walker had not forgotten him. And sooner or later, one of those worlds would collide with the other. August arrived with warm afternoons and clear blue skies stretching above Cedar Grove. Life at Bennett Bloom's continued moving forward at its usual pace, but subtle changes had begun appearing around Ethan. At first, Claire barely noticed them. A black luxury vehicle parked across the street one morning. The next week, a sharply dressed woman stopped by the flower shop asking whether Ethan happened to be nearby. Then there were the phone calls. Ethan normally ignored them. Whenever his phone rang, he glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, and silenced it. Claire found the behavior unusual, but not alarming. Everyone had private matters. Still, curiosity quietly started growing. One Thursday afternoon, Ethan was helping unload a delivery truck when his phone rang again. This time his expression changed immediately. The relaxed smile disappeared. Seriousness replaced it. I need to take this, he said. Claire nodded. Everything okay? Probably. The answer sounded uncertain. Ethan stepped outside and walked toward the end of the block. Claire continued organizing flowers, but found herself glancing through the window. The conversation appeared intense. Ethan paced slowly while listening. Several times he ran a hand through his hair, something he only did when frustrated. Nearly 20 minutes later, he returned. Bad news? Claire asked. Ethan forced a small smile. Just work. Claire paused. I thought you worked remotely. I do. What kind of work? For a brief second, Ethan hesitated. It was only a moment, but Claire noticed. Consulting, he answered. The explanation sounded rehearsed. Not exactly false, just incomplete. Claire let the subject drop, but the hesitation stayed with her. Later that evening, after the flower shop closed, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, staring at a folder resting on the kitchen table. Richard had delivered it personally earlier that day. Inside were reports, financial updates, expansion proposals, and meeting schedules. The world Ethan had left behind continued moving whether he participated or not. His company expected decisions. Investors expected leadership. Thousands of employees depended on choices only he could make. For months, he had balanced both lives carefully. Yet maintaining the separation was becoming increasingly difficult. His phone rang again. Richard. Ethan answered immediately. What now? You cannot avoid this forever. Ethan sighed. I know. The board meeting is next month. I know. And the annual leadership summit follows 2 weeks later. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Richard. What? I know. Silence followed. Then Richard asked the question Ethan had been avoiding. Have you told her? Ethan looked toward the window overlooking town. No, you need to. I will. When? Ethan had no answer. Richard seemed to understand immediately. That is what worries me. The next morning brought another surprise. Claire arrived at the flower shop and discovered a large floral order waiting near the register. The arrangement was extravagant. Elegant white roses, imported orchids, and rare seasonal flowers carefully assembled into a breathtaking display. Attached was a card from a wealthy property developer who occasionally purchased flowers for corporate events. Claire read the note and immediately frowned. The message suggested a private dinner invitation she had no interest in accepting. She picked up the phone and called the client's office. 20 minutes later, the flowers were on their way back. Ethan happened to arrive just as the delivery driver loaded them into his truck. Those were impressive, he said. Claire nodded. Very. Why return them? She looked genuinely confused by the question. Because I did not want them. Most people would have kept them. Claire laughed softly. Most people probably enjoy being impressed by expensive gifts. Ethan studied her expression. And you do not. Claire shook her head. If somebody wants my attention, they should talk to me. The answer hit Ethan harder than she realized. Because beneath the simplicity of her words lay something important. Claire valued sincerity more than appearances. Character more than status. The exact qualities that had drawn him toward her from the beginning. That afternoon, another unexpected event occurred. A luxury SUV pulled directly in front of Bennett Bloom's. Several customers immediately glanced outside. The vehicle looked wildly out of place in a small-town flower district. A man wearing an expensive suit stepped out and entered the shop. The moment Ethan saw him, every muscle in his body tensed. Claire noticed instantly. Ethan, she asked quietly. The man approached with determined steps. Mr. Walker. The entire shop seemed to freeze. Ethan's expression darkened. Not here. The suited man stopped. We have been trying to reach you for days. I said not here. Claire looked between them, confusion growing rapidly. Mr. Walker. The title echoed in her mind. The stranger lowered his voice. The shareholders' meeting has been moved up. Ethan remained silent. They need you in Seattle. Several customers openly stared now. Ethan finally guided the man toward the door. Their conversation continued outside where Claire could not hear every word. Yet she noticed enough. Respect. Urgency. Familiarity. Whatever Ethan's real profession was, it clearly involved responsibilities far beyond ordinary consulting work. When Ethan returned several minutes later, the atmosphere felt different. Claire folded her arms. Shareholders? Ethan looked tired. Claire, consultants have shareholders? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since meeting him, Claire saw genuine panic in his eyes. Not because he had done something wrong. Because the carefully constructed wall between his two lives had just begun to crack. And standing in the middle of Bennett Bloom's, Claire realized she might not know Ethan Walker nearly as well as she thought. The truth arrived on a bright September afternoon when Claire least expected it. The annual Cedar Grove Community Growth Gala was one of the largest events of the year. Local businesses, nonprofit organizations, community leaders, and regional sponsors gathered to celebrate projects that had helped improve the town. Bennett Bloom's had received an invitation because of Claire's volunteer work and community programs. She almost declined. Formal events were not her favorite thing. But after weeks of encouragement from friends and customers, she finally agreed to attend. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as guests filled round tables decorated with elegant floral centerpieces. Claire smiled when she noticed several arrangements had clearly been inspired by designs from her own shop. Soft music played in the background. Waiters moved between tables. Everything felt normal, at least at first. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Tonight," he announced, "we would also like to recognize one of the individuals whose investments and leadership have helped transform communities throughout the Pacific Northwest." Claire paid little attention initially. Her focus remained on a conversation with a local school principal seated beside her. Then a massive screen behind the stage illuminated. A familiar face appeared. Claire froze instantly. The room erupted into applause. Her heart stopped. There, displayed across two enormous screens, stood Ethan. Not the Ethan who carried flower deliveries. Not the Ethan who spent afternoons helping customers choose bouquets. This version wore a tailored suit while standing in front of modern office towers. Headlines flashed beside his image. Business magazine covers appeared one after another. Corporate achievements, national awards, leadership conferences, major development projects. The applause grew louder. Claire could barely breathe. "Please welcome Mr. Ethan Walker, founder and chief executive officer of Walker Capital Group." The entire ballroom rose to its feet. Claire remained seated in stunned silence. Ethan walked onto the stage. Calm, confident, familiar, and completely unfamiliar at the same time. Every unanswered question suddenly made sense. The luxury vehicles, the mysterious phone calls, the shareholders, the assistants searching for him, the expensive suit that appeared occasionally before disappearing again. He was not a consultant. He was not an ordinary resident renting a modest apartment while figuring out life. Ethan Walker was one of the most successful business leaders in the country. A millionaire whose name appeared in national publications. A man whose companies influenced entire industries. Claire felt her stomach drop. Around her, guests whispered excitedly, "I cannot believe Ethan Walker is here. His company funded 3 community projects this year. Do you know how much he is worth?" Claire barely heard them. Her attention remained fixed on the stage. Ethan began speaking about community investment, local businesses, and the importance of supporting people rather than simply funding projects. His voice remained steady, professional, polished. Then his eyes moved across the audience. For a brief second, he saw her. The confidence disappeared, not visibly enough for most people to notice. But Claire noticed. She knew him too well now. The realization hit him immediately. She knew. By the time the presentation ended, Claire had already made her decision. She quietly stood and moved toward the exit. She needed air, distance, time to think. She nearly reached the doors when she heard footsteps behind her. "Claire." Ethan's voice stopped her instantly. She turned slowly. For several seconds, neither spoke. The noise of the ballroom faded into the background. "I was going to tell you," Ethan said softly. Claire laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because she did not know what else to do. "When?" she asked. Ethan opened his mouth, but found no answer. That silence hurt more than any explanation. "You let me believe you were someone else." "No," Ethan stepped closer. "I let you believe I was less than the whole story." Claire folded her arms. "That sounds like something a chief executive officer would say." Pain crossed his face. "Claire, do you know what the worst part is?" she asked quietly. Ethan remained silent. "I trusted you." The words landed harder than anything else. Ethan looked away briefly. "I know. Did you ever plan on telling me?" "Yes." "When?" Again, no answer came. Claire nodded slowly. "Exactly." She looked toward the ballroom where guests still celebrated the man she now realized she had never truly known. The grocery store. Her voice softened. The walks. The flower shop. Was any of that real? Ethan answered immediately. Every second. Claire wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. That was what made this so painful. Because despite the deception, she knew the kindness she had seen was real. The laughter was real. The friendship was real. Yet standing there now, she could not separate the truth from the secret. Ethan took another step forward. "The man who carried flower deliveries with you was real. The millionaire standing on that stage is real too." Ethan nodded. "Yes. And you never trusted me enough to let those two people exist at the same time." Silence followed. Ethan could not argue because she was right. For months he had protected the truth. Protected his identity. Protected the life he thought would complicate everything. Instead, The secret had become the complication. Claire looked at him one final time. The disappointment in her eyes hurt more than any business failure he had ever experienced. "I need time," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away. Ethan remained standing alone outside the ballroom as the reality settled heavily around him. The woman who had never cared about his money had finally learned the truth. And for the first time since arriving in Cedar Grove, Ethan realized he might lose the one thing he valued more than all of it. The days following the gala felt unusually quiet. Autumn slowly settled over Cedar Grove, painting the trees with shades of gold and amber. Customers continued visiting Bennett Bloom's. Deliveries still needed to be completed. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet for Claire, something was missing. She noticed it every morning when the bell above the shop door remained silent. Ethan no longer stopped by for coffee. He no longer wandered through the aisles pretending to need flower advice. He no longer appeared unexpectedly with one of his ridiculous excuses for visiting. The absence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt disappointing. Meanwhile, Ethan respected the distance she requested, not because he wanted to stay away, because he understood he had earned her frustration. Every day, he considered visiting. Every day, he decided against it. He knew trust could not be repaired through pressure. It could only be rebuilt through patience and honesty. 3 weeks passed. Then one afternoon, Claire received an unexpected invitation. The Cedar Grove Community Center planned to dedicate a new educational and vocational program for local students. Several business leaders would attend. The organizers specifically requested her presence because Bennett Bloom's had supported multiple community projects over the years. Reluctantly, she agreed. The event took place on a bright October afternoon. Families gathered outside the newly renovated facility. Children explored classrooms. Volunteers welcomed guests through the entrance. Claire arrived expecting a simple ceremony. Instead, she discovered something surprising. Every room inside the building carried the names of local contributors. Scholarship programs, technology labs, reading centers, career training spaces. As she moved through the facility, one name appeared repeatedly. Walker Foundation. Claire stopped walking. She saw it once. Then again. Then again. A volunteer noticed her reaction. "Pretty incredible, right?" the woman said. Claire nodded slowly. "The foundation funded all this." "Most of it." The volunteer smiled. "Mr. Walker insisted on keeping things quiet for years." Claire frowned. "Years?" "Absolutely. He supports programs all over the region." The woman gestured toward the building around them. "Half the reason this place exists is because of him." Claire felt confused. This was not the image she expected. The headlines she had seen after the gala focused on business success, investments, and corporate growth. Nobody had mentioned schools, scholarships, community centers. She continued walking through the facility. Every room revealed another story. Students receiving grants, small businesses receiving mentorship, families receiving support during difficult periods. The more she learned, the more complicated her emotions became. Finally, she entered a small reading room near the back of the building. A framed photograph hung on the wall. Ethan stood beside a group of children holding books. He looked exactly like the man she remembered from Cedar Grove. Not the businessman from magazine covers. Not the executive from conference stages. Just Ethan. Beneath the photograph sat a simple plaque, dedicated to those who believe opportunity should belong to everyone. Claire stared at the words for several moments. Suddenly, she remembered dozens of conversations they had shared. The way he always listened when she talked about helping people. The way he admired acts of kindness. The way he quietly funded the grant that saved her refrigeration system without seeking recognition. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. Later that afternoon, the ceremony began. Claire found a seat near the back. She had no idea Ethan would attend. Then the audience started applauding. She looked up and saw him walking toward the stage. Their eyes met briefly. Surprise crossed his face. He clearly had not expected her to be there either. The presentation focused on community investment and educational opportunities. Unlike the gala, Ethan spoke less about business and more about people. Students, teachers, families, small business owners. The passion in his voice sounded familiar because Claire had heard it before. It was the same sincerity she recognized whenever he talked about helping someone in town. After the event ended, guests gathered outside. Claire stood near the parking area watching families explore the facility. She heard footsteps approaching and immediately knew who it was. "Hi," Ethan said softly. Claire turned toward him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she surprised both of them. "You never told me about any of this." Ethan glanced toward the community center. "I never wanted credit." "That is not normal." He smiled faintly. "Neither is spending your own inventory helping strangers." Claire almost laughed. Almost. The tension between them felt different now. Not gone, but softer, less sharp than before. Ethan looked at her carefully. "I meant what I said that night." Claire remained silent. Everything between us was real. The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to look away. "I know," she admitted quietly. Relief flickered across his face. Not victory, just relief. Claire took a slow breath. "I am still angry." Ethan nodded. "Fair. I still wish you had trusted me sooner." "So do I." Another pause followed. Then Claire asked the question that had been growing in her mind all afternoon. "Why did you stay in Cedar Grove?" Ethan smiled softly. "Because I met a woman carrying flowers who helped a stranger without asking who he was." For the first time in weeks, Claire smiled back. It was small, brief, but real. And as Ethan saw that smile, hope returned for the first time since the night everything had fallen apart. 1 year later, spring returned to Cedar Grove exactly as it had the day everything began. The streets filled with color. Trees blossomed along Maple Street. Outdoor tables appeared outside cafes. The town seemed brighter somehow, as if winter had finally released its hold on every corner. Bennett Bloom's was thriving. The shop had expanded into the neighboring storefront, allowing Claire to create a larger design studio and community workshop space. Local residents stopped by constantly. Some purchased flowers. Others simply wanted to talk. The shop had become more than a business. It had become part of the town itself. Claire stood near the front window one sunny afternoon arranging tulips when Megan appeared beside her with an amused smile. "You know he has been here 3 times this week already." Claire laughed. "Only 3. Exactly my point." Through the glass, Ethan could be seen speaking with a customer outside. A year had changed many things. Their relationship had survived difficult conversations, painful truths, and the challenge of rebuilding trust. The process had not been easy. Real trust never was. Yet Ethan had done something few people ever managed. He had stopped trying to impress Claire and simply focused on proving that his actions matched his words. He remained involved in the community. He continued supporting local programs quietly. He spent as much time in Cedar Grove as possible despite the demands of his business responsibilities. Most importantly, he never hid anything from her again. That honesty changed everything. Later that afternoon, Ethan entered the shop carrying a familiar paper grocery bag. Claire immediately noticed it. "What is that?" she asked. Ethan placed the bag carefully on the counter. "A reminder." Claire stared at the logo printed on the side. Bennett Bloom's. The same style of paper bag from the grocery trip that started their entire story. "You still have that?" Ethan smiled. "I told you I keep important things." Claire shook her head, laughing. "That is ridiculous." "Probably. Definitely." Yet she could not stop smiling. The bag represented more than groceries now. It represented the moment 2 strangers crossed paths and changed each other's lives forever. "Come with me," Ethan said suddenly. Claire narrowed her eyes. "That sounds suspicious." "Good. Why?" "Because surprises are difficult without suspicion." 30 minutes later, they arrived at the small community garden on the edge of town. Claire immediately noticed something unusual. Friends, customers, volunteers, and local residents filled the area. Decorative lights hung from nearby trees. Flower arrangements lined the pathways. Everyone seemed unusually excited. "Ethan," Claire said slowly, "what is happening?" He smiled nervously. "Something important." For the first time in a long while, Claire noticed genuine anxiety in his expression. The sight immediately made her curious. Ethan guided her toward the center of the garden. There, beneath a wooden arch covered in flowers, stood a simple table. Resting on top was the old paper grocery bag preserved inside a glass display case. Claire stopped walking. "You did not." "I did." Several people laughed quietly nearby. Claire covered her face with her hands. "This is unbelievable." Ethan stepped closer. "Do you remember what happened the day we met?" Claire smiled. "You nearly lost enough groceries to feed an entire neighborhood." "Accurate." "And then I rescued your oranges." "Heroically." The crowd laughed again. Ethan's expression softened. "What you actually did was much bigger than that." Claire looked at him quietly. Ethan took a slow breath. A year ago, I came to Cedar Grove trying to escape a life that no longer made sense. His voice remained calm but emotional. Then a woman carrying flowers stopped to help a stranger nobody else noticed. Claire felt her heart begin racing. Around them, the garden grew completely silent. She did not care who he was. She did not care what he owned. She simply chose kindness. Ethan smiled. That choice changed everything. Tears immediately filled Claire's eyes. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. Several people gasped softly. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. Ethan laughed nervously. I give presentations to thousands of people, and somehow this is more terrifying. The crowd laughed. Claire laughed too, though tears already streamed down her cheeks. Ethan opened the box. Inside rested a beautiful ring. Elegant. Timeless. Perfect. Claire Bennett, he said softly. You helped me become the person I wanted to be. You taught me that success means nothing without people to share it with. You reminded me that kindness changes lives. His eyes never left hers. Will you marry me? For one perfect moment, time seemed to stop. Claire looked at Ethan, then at the ring, then at the old grocery bag that had somehow become the symbol of their journey. Every memory flooded back. The parking lot, the flower shop, the secrets, the heartbreak, the forgiveness, the love that survived all of it. Finally, she laughed through her tears and nodded. Yes. The crowd erupted into applause. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a warm embrace. Around them, friends and neighbors celebrated. Flowers swayed gently in the spring breeze. The sun shined brightly overhead, and as Claire rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, she realized something remarkable. The greatest gift she had ever received was never his money, his success, or his influence. It was the simple truth hidden beneath all of it. The stranger she once helped carry groceries home had become the love of her life.